thank you so much for joining me today, Renny. I just, first of all, I wondered if you could just tell me a little bit about sort of the birth of this project and how you came to it.
It was really the producer, Courtney Solomon, and Lionsgate, the studio, who thought of me and approached me about this. And basically, they called me and said, "Do you remember this movie?" And I said, "Do I remember it? That's a horror classic, The Strangers. I love that movie. And what do you have in mind?" And I was afraid that they're going to say like, "Oh, we're going to remake it, or we want to do a sequel to it," and it wouldn't have been something that I would want to do right now in my life. But when they sent me the script and I opened the file, and usual script is about 90 pages, 100 pages long, and I looked at the file and it said 287 pages. I was like, okay, this is something epic. And so their plan was to reimagine the movie using the premise of The Strangers, which is a home invasion movie, very, very scary and realistic home invasion movie, taking that premise, but using really the premise as the first act of a three-act epic four and a half hour movie. And then breaking that movie into 3 chapters that would be released separately. So I felt like, what an opportunity of a lifetime to take such a strong premise and being able to study the characters, the protagonist and the antagonist for a 4.5 hour period and really give the audience much more than they usually get.
Wow. So how did you, was there always the initial kind of idea that this was going to split nicely into 3 stories? Because by the sounds of it, it's very much one long continuous story though, is it?
Yeah, it is one story that basically takes 5 days of story time. And it really started with the idea like in the original film, what if Liv Tyler's character lived? What would happen next day? So it was definitely, the idea was like, okay, it is 3 separate movies, but it's one continuous story, which is so unusual. If you think of like, usually, studios make a movie, and if it's successful, then they want to cash in on it and say a couple of years later, like, let's make a sequel. The characters have changed, the actors have changed, the times have changed. And, then you just, take the characters and put them in a completely different environment. And then the same thing happens again. But in this case, it's a really cool opportunity that we just follow the characters literally the next day. So they will be the same people, they look the same, and you just get to experience more of the journey.
Did you treat it in your head when you were directing it like these are 3 separate entities? Like, did you kind of like separate them as you were filming them into, this is going to be the middle film, this is going to be the third film, or did you kind of treat it as one whole film?
That's a really good question. I never really have thought about that a lot, but I would say that I did treat them as separate movies because I wanted to give them a little bit different kind of a visual language. I wanted them to be like steps on this journey. So if the first movie is mainly inside this house and it's about the home invasion, then the second movie is it's a larger canvas, and the third movie is even bigger. So in my mind, the visual language of each movie was a little different, and the one connective theme was always to keep it real. Not that bigger is better, but that it's always realistic. And it's something that the audience can relate to. So anybody can feel like they could be in that situation.
One of the things that makes that original movie so scary is that we find out so little, don't we, about these strangers and about what's going on and why it's happening. Were you ever concerned coming to this project that, that could take away its power by kind of expanding on this story, I suppose?
Yes, and I totally know what you mean, because the original movie really was revolutionary in the fact that it just didn't explain anything, because Hollywood movies always tend to have that, structure where by the end of the movie you understand what was what. And I remember when I saw it that it was both really satisfying because it didn't answer questions, and then it was also a little bit irritating because you felt like, come on, I watched all of this and then they just left and that's it. But
Yeah.
but I think that for the fans of the original and for the new fans of this franchise, I think it is going to be important that we don't explain things. So we are going to expand on stuff. We will explain some things, like I can tell you that we will tell the audience who Tamara is, because in the original movie, the killers show up at the door of these innocent poor people, and they just ask, like, is Tamara home? And we never find out who the hell was Tamara. But in our second or third movie, you will find out who she is or was. But we won't neatly explain things. We won't say, the killers are this and they do this because of this reason. We want to keep the sense of mystery and the sense of randomness, which made the original so powerful, which is this is kind of violence that can happen to anybody, any day, and there is no rhyme or reason why some people do this.
And again, like, what I think of with that original movie are those very scary moments in that first act, right, where you'll see people in the window or in the background and that kind of thing. Really scary. Tell me a little bit about how you kind of approached the scares in these movies. Like, were you going for a kind of similar tone to the original?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And what was so great about the original was just that sense of dread and the fact that first these people are outside your house and they are knocking on your door and they're looking in through the windows. And then you think, like everybody's instinct is, you lock the windows and doors and you're going to be safe. It's your home. It's your house. And then you realize that they are already inside. I think there's nothing scarier. It's like they are inside. I don't know how they got in there, but there they are. It's like you think you have some control over your life and your safety, but you don't. So I definitely wanted to keep that same feeling in these movies, that there's nothing supernatural about it. They are not superheroes in any sense, these killers, but they do have this really, really ominous way of being able to be in control. They are never weak. You can't hurt them. They are always in control. They are always 3 steps ahead of you, and there's no way you can get away from them. They know how to get to you if they want to, but they are basically toying with you. It's like cat and mouse. They will kill you eventually, but they're going to take their time because it's their sadistic pleasure. And I definitely wanted to keep that sense of dread in these movies, and also to avoid jump scares. Of course, there are certain moments, obviously, if your ear is against the door and an axe comes through the door, it's going to be a jump scare. But other than that, I really wanted this to be a movie that is not about going boo to the audience, but to just have this constant sense of fear and dread rather than jump scares. And I think that that's very present in all the 3 movies for sure.
And there is something about that kind of story, like when you take all the different subgenres of horror, monster movies and slashers and stuff, there's something about the home invasion that I think people find particularly frightening and troubling, right? You hear a lot of people go, oh no, I can't handle home invasion. What do you think it is about these types of stories that terrify us more than any other type of horror?
I think that it's like supernatural and fantastical horror is kind of safe because while it can be really scary, you can always think of, well, that's just, it can happen. It's not like some monster can crawl out of my TV set and attack me. But home invasion, when it's done in a very realistic way, is the ultimate fear that we have since we're kids. We think that there could be something under our bed or, outside the window, shadows are moving at night, or there's some sounds in the forest or wherever. That is a primal sense of your sense of safety being threatened by something unseen and unknown. And your sanctuary is your home, your bedroom and your living room, and no one should be able to invade that space. And so it's the ultimate violation of your safety that somebody does. And I want every person to remember this movie when somebody rings their doorbell or somebody knocks on their door, like, think twice whether you're going to open that door or not.
Does horror still scare you, Rennie? I mean, you've directed so many iconic horror movies now for decades, so many horror fan favorite movies. Are you a horror fan personally? Like, do you enjoy watching horror, and does horror still scare you?
I am a horror fan, and I've been since I was a kid, and it's really the fault of my mother who took me as her date to see really, really scary movies since I was 6 years old. So it's definitely part of my life, and I love horror movies. But I have to confess, I never watch horror movies at home alone because it's just they sneak into my nightmares, and then I'm sleeping and I'm reliving those. So only way I'm watching horror movies, I want to go to the movie theater because I love that experience of being with other people and being with my wife or being with my friends and being able to kind of like, find safety in them and bury my head sometimes in somebody's shoulder. And also having that experience of other people in the movie theater, gasping, screaming, laughing a little bit, embarrassed, having reacted so strongly. I love that experience. But at home, I never watch horror.
I'd love to just briefly ask you about your memories of directing a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. Obviously, you directed a Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4, Dream Master, an absolute classic in the series, right? What are your memories of kind of making that movie and being involved in that?
Really great memories, but it was a tough one. It was the first like a real Hollywood movie that I was directing. And we were making it during the writer's strike, which meant that we didn't really have a script. So we had to just kind of invent the movie as we went. And I took a very strong perspective into this movie because I had been a big Nightmare on Elm Street fan. And I saw in the evolution of the franchise that I felt like the fourth installment couldn't rely on just, oh, it's really scary, and there's this child molesting scary guy who hunts these children. I felt like we couldn't sell the premise anymore, that we had to reinvent it, invent it a little bit. So I sold the idea to the studio that I use the term, that Freddy should become the James Bond of horror, whatever that meant. But I said that he has to be a bigger than life character. And he is actually the center of the movie, and we have to also wink at the audience in a way of saying like we are in on the joke, so it's okay to also laugh. So I invented these nightmares like let's put the victims on a pizza, which was completely like absurd, but the studio bought that idea, and it ended up working. But it was a big risk. So I remember making the movie and having kind of a freedom to use my imagination and come up with really wild scenarios. And at the same time, I felt the incredible paralyzing fear of like, what if I've done this wrong? And we really didn't know. I remember sitting with the studio heads in the editing room and showing them the scenes and then being like, yeah, it's really effective, but at the same time, like, holy shit, if this doesn't work. And it wasn't until we had a test screening in Hollywood a little before the release of the movie, and it just went through the roof. The audience loved it. They were clapping, they were cheering, they were screaming, that, the studio had turned to me and he said, Renny, I think you did it. And it was such a rewarding moment because I had lived, 6 months in utter fear, like inspiration and excitement and fear. And at that moment, I felt like it was going to pay off. So that is a very dear movie for me.